Sato ma sangamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya avir ma edhi Rundrayate dakshina mukham te namam pahinityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and protect us evermore with your loving presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning. The title of today's talk is The Favorite Son. There's the sun over there. This is the result of a poll I've taken over the last 15 years or so. I have asked this question of many monks and devotees, mostly monks, but also some devotees in our order, this question: if you could be any one of Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples, who would you be? Who is your choice? And I've gotten many answers, of course. One popular choice was Swami Brahmananda. Swami Brahmananda was said by Sri Ramakrishna to be an Ishvara Koti, sometimes translated as ever-free soul. Means that such people, beings you could say, come to this world not for their own salvation. They are born with their spiritual consciousness already awakened. And they come here to give spirituality to people like us, who are trying to grow along spiritual lines and eventually attain salvation or moksha. He was also said to be the purest of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, and a partial manifestation of the goddess or incarnation of the Divine Mother Radha, the companion of Krishna. So that's Swami Brahmananda. He was a popular choice. Another popular choice was Swami Shivananda. So there's going to be a lot of Anandas here. So if that's a difficult thing, we can maybe go over it at the end. Or people on YouTube, just slide that bar to the left and you can get that name again. Swami Shivananda was the president of the order after Swami Brahmananda. A great illumined soul called Mahapurush, said to be the reincarnation of Ananda, Buddha's disciple. He himself said that he had not come to this world in 2,500 years since the incarnation of the Buddha. He himself said that. He seemed to live in another reality, a kind of divine reality. There was one incident where he had a disciple walk in to ask him some question or pay some respects or something, I don't know what. And Swami Shivananda bows down to his own disciple. And the disciple gets confused and alarmed and wondering why his guru is bowing down to him. And he says, "Sir, don't you recognize me? I am your disciple and you're bowing down to me." And Swami Shivananda laughed and said, "My boy, first I see God, and then I see you." So he first sees the divine, bows down to that, and oh yeah, this one happens to be my disciple. That's Swami Shivananda, another popular choice. Another one after that was Swami Saradananda. Swami Saradananda wrote that big fat book, Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master. He was pressed in later life to divulge his yogic attainments. Have you had samadhi? Some of the junior monks asked him this question. And he dodged and hemmed and hawed and tried not to say anything. But then finally he admitted, he said, "Go read the book. Go read the chapter on samadhi." And I have not written anything in that chapter without experiencing it myself. That's what he said. Remarkable statement. For those of you who have not read the book, find the chapter on samadhi and you will see that this Swami has attained some dizzying heights of yoga. He was also Holy Mother's attendant, which may also have contributed to his popularity in the poll. Another one after that was Swami Ramakrishnananda, another fairly common choice. Ramakrishnananda, that name actually was going to be taken by Swami Vivekananda at one point, but Swami Vivekananda said, "No, I think I'm going to give it to," it was Sashi, that was his name before he took monastic vows. "I think I'm going to give it to Sashi because of his tremendous love and devotion to Sri Ramakrishna." And I think that's probably why he came in strongly in the poll, is that he had such love for the master. It is said that he actually could sit in worship for 24 hours without getting up to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom or go to bed or any of it. And somebody asked him, "How is this possible? How can you do this?" And he very quietly and humbly said, "Devotion can accomplish anything. Love. Love can somehow get you to do that." So there were others. I don't want to spend the whole hour talking about the ones, the sort of the second place and third place choices. A notable absence from the list is Swami Vivekananda. In asking this question for the last 15 years, I have found exactly one monk, one, who wanted to be Vivekananda. That's it. That is a fascinating question in my mind, and I'm not going to try and explain it now because I think that's probably a whole Sunday talk on its own. So I didn't forget him. He did not place at all well in this survey. The overwhelming favorite son of Sri Ramakrishna among the devotees is Swami Brahmananda, whose birthday is tomorrow. He was absolutely, I think probably, I didn't tally it all up, I think probably Premananda was in second place, probably. After that, it's kind of a tie between everybody else and it sort of trickles off. But basically everybody wants, Premananda was a distant second. Everybody pretty much wants to be Swami Brahmananda. That's the answer. So, of course, the question is why? Why did everybody pick him? I asked that question a few times, but there wasn't always time to ask that question, or I wasn't very fastidious about categorizing the whys. I'm going to go over sort of my feeling of why people picked him, in addition to some of my own ideas. But that is basically what I'm going to talk about now. Why did everybody pick Swami Brahmananda as the favorite son of Sri Ramakrishna? The first explanation I'm going to give is the kind of sense of royalty that the Swami carried. He was given the name Raja, king, by Swami Vivekananda when Sri Ramakrishna was still alive. And Sri Ramakrishna heard about it and said, that's a good name for him. He had in everything he did, from the way he spoke, to the way he ate, to the way he sat, to the way he walked, royalty about him. It was very noticeable. And that's something that is remarkable, because when we're talking about Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, they all are men of exalted spiritual attainment, and a natural kind of reverence and sense of royalty pervades all of them. But in that elite company, still he stood out. And I'm going to read a reminiscence of one of the monks who later became his disciple, and fell in love with him the first time he saw him just because of the way he walked. This is Swami Vijayananda, who started the Vedanta work in South America. He's a young man, he hasn't joined the order yet, and he's watching a bunch of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna walk around from like 100 yards away. So these are his words. He says, "The Swamis were strolling around. Soon I came to know that they were all disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Brahmananda, Turiyananda, Premananda, Shivananda, Subodhananda. I was looking at them from a distance. My attention was drawn by the way they walked. Each Swami had a peculiar way of walking. But all of them walked with such a light step as I had never seen before. Above all, the way Swami Brahmananda walked became forever imprinted in my mind. The Swami was tall, with a regal bearing, and from about 100 meters away, it seemed to me that his feet touched and at the same time did not touch the ground. It is very difficult to describe this way of walking. I have never seen anybody walking like this again. At that time, in my first romantic period, when everything that is charming attracts a young man, Swami Brahmananda attracted me only because of his majestic way of walking. And so every little thing that he did reeked of royalty, everything. And it wasn't just his physical actions, it was also the atmosphere around him. He changed the vibration in the room when he was present. There's another reminiscence I'm going to read now. This was from another monk who's not his disciple, who actually was a disciple of Holy Mother. But he describes this other characteristic of royalty, that sense of reverence and awe that we feel in the presence of a real God-man. He says, I climbed up the stairs to the upper story, and I found 3 visitors sitting on a bench just outside Maharaj's room. They were waiting for an audience with Maharaj, and I joined them. We waited for about a half an hour. Maharaj emerged from the hall onto the veranda and began walking back and forth. The look on his face filled me with veneration. How graceful and serene he looked. His bright and golden complexion blended with the ochre of his robe. Upright, strong, and at the same time charming, he looked as divine and calm as a god. Walking in front of us with his face turned up and eyes withdrawn, he appeared to me to be completely unconscious of his surroundings. He went past us a few times, but no one dared to break his solemn absorption. We stood in awe with our hands folded, gazing at him reverently. All four of them like this. Just, what's that? Looking at him, right? And it's not just the devoted that had this experience. There are other anecdotes of not so spiritual people who still felt a kind of inexplicable awe and reverence in his presence. And so that's one possible explanation for why Swami Brahmananda placed first as the favorite son in the poll. I don't think it's the real reason. I don't think actually the reason that so many people picked him is because of this innate royalty that he carried around with him. It's admirable, of course, but my personal feeling is that that's not really what attracted all the votes. More likely, I think, is the actual height of his spiritual attainments. Now we're talking again about Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples, whose spiritual attainments are all difficult to even really imagine for us. Wonderful to think about, but it's more of a kind of flight of the imagination for us than anything we can really relate to in all their cases. And yet, amongst them, amongst these disciples, even they thought that Swami Brahmananda had attained a more exalted level, you could say, of spiritual unfoldment than they had. Even Swami Vivekananda said that among us, Rakal, he called him by his pre-monastic name, Rakal, is the greatest in spirituality, whatever that means. And so just how high was it? Once a devotee asked Sri Ramakrishna about his disciples and said, how are they doing? You know, how far have they gone in their spiritual progress, right? How are they progressing? And so Sri Ramakrishna started to draw some lines in the ground to indicate, you know, the bigger the line, the more spiritual you had become, right? So he draws a line in the ground and he points to himself, to his body, and says, this is the attainment of this one's state, this line he's drawn in the ground. Then he draws another line, slightly shorter, and he says, this is Narendra's state. That's Swami Vivekananda. In this way, he drew many lines, drawing them progressively smaller, and showed which line indicated whose progress. Baburam's, it's Premananda. Tarak's is Shivananda. He goes on with some other disciples, Swami Sardananda and Swami Ramakrishnananda. But he didn't draw a line for Maharaj. The devotee asked, what about Maharaj? Thakur smiled and drew a line which was longer than all the rest, including his own. Do we get that? Including his own, right? Now, if you accept the idea here that Sri Ramakrishna is the avatar, God in the flesh, that's basically the sort of position I'm taking in today's talk, then he just drew a line saying that this particular disciple of his had more spirituality than God in the flesh, right? So this is difficult to process. What does this mean, right? So this devotee carries this mystery around for several years, and then after Sri Ramakrishna passes away, he decides to ask Holy Mother this question. Maybe she can shed some lights on what this means, right? So this reminiscence continues. In later years, this devotee narrated Sri Ramakrishna's drawing of these lines to the Holy Mother. What did she say? Holy Mother commented, but of course, Rakal is the sun. Okay. Now, the person who is narrating this, not the person who asked the question about and got the lines drawn, but the person who's telling the story, he is another Swami and a disciple of Swami Brahmananda named Swami Nirvanananda. He was vice president of the order, passed away in 1984, I think. And he was Swami Brahmananda's personal attendant. So made his tea, made his bed, cleaned his room, all those kinds of things. Swami Brahmananda was pleased with his service, and at the end of his life, he promised this particular disciple that he would be a Brahmagyani in this life. He would realize his union with Brahman in this life. He promised this to his disciple, who's telling this anecdote here, Swami Nirvanananda. So, it stands to reason, I don't know when in this life Swami Nirvanananda got his Brahmagyana. I don't know when that happened. But this anecdote he's talking about is many years after Swami Brahmananda passed. So it stands to reason that he's very advanced spiritually at this point. Maybe he's not a Brahmagyani yet, I don't know, but he's high up, you could say. And what does he say about this? He says, they alone know what they meant. How can we understand this thing with these lines? And the avatar somehow is shorter in spirituality, and the sun somehow is greater than all the others. How are we to understand? And so I don't think we can understand, but it's still kind of fun to try. And so I'm going to next go through a conversation that he had with another one of his disciples, who was actually the founder of this place, Swami Brahmananda. This is a very famous conversation. It's the very beginning of his biography, The Eternal Companion. And I know that some of you are probably familiar with this, but in case you've forgotten, it's good to hear it again. Swami P, that's the Swami that was here until he passed away in 1976, is going to have a sort of loving argument with his guru. He says, one day, I hesitated to accept something that Maharaj told me. Swami Shivananda was present at the time, and he agreed with Maharaj immediately. Swami Shivananda, we remember, right? That was one of the guys who finished pretty well on the poll, and his disciple came in, and he bowed to his disciple, and the disciple got alarmed, and he said, oh, well, first I see God, and then I see you. That's Swami Shivananda, okay? So a great illumined soul in his own rights, all right? Okay, so Swami P says, I did not like this. Swami Shivananda immediately agrees with Maharaj, and Swami P says, I don't like this. Later, I talked to Swami Shivananda alone, and more or less accused him of being a yes man to Maharaj. Now, I can't really communicate the bravery required for a young monk to approach Swami Shivananda and say something like that. Swami P was quite bold. So Swami Shivananda laughs and says, my boy, you see in Maharaj only Maharaj, but we see the external form of Maharaj with nothing inside of a God. We see. What's we see? We see is all the direct disciples. The monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna do not perceive the same reality that you do. You see a body, and you infer the existence of a mind, and you communicate through words with this thing, right? That's what we all do. We, the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, don't do that. We do something else. He says, we see the external form of Maharaj with nothing inside it but God. Whatever Maharaj tells you comes directly from God. Okay, that's what he says. And now Swami P points out the obvious. He says, it should be remembered that this statement was not made by a mere ignorant enthusiast, but by one who was himself an illumined soul. Its truth was not clear to me at the time, but later I began to understand and believe it because of a talk which I had with Maharaj himself, and that's what we're going to do now. So the Swami is going to relate this conversation, and he really does manage to paint Maharaj into a corner where he has to admit more or less where his consciousness lies. He says, one day he asked me, that's Maharaj, one day Maharaj asked me to look at the almanac and find an auspicious date for his departure from Madras. As I did so, I could not help smiling. Maharaj noticed this and asked me why I was so amused. I replied, well, Maharaj, you always go through this routine whenever you plan to go anywhere. But then you suddenly make up your mind at the last minute to go somewhere else on some other day. At this, Maharaj said, do you think I do anything according to my own will? The devotees insist upon fixing some date for my going, so to avoid constant pestering, I fix a tentative date. But I do not move or do anything until I know the will of the Lord. I do not move. Can you really accept that? I do not move or do anything until I know the will of the Lord. Do you mean to say, I asked, that you are always guided by the will of God? Maharaj, yes. Myself, well, Maharaj, I too may think or feel that I am doing the will of God, when actually I'm only following my own inclinations and attributing them to God's will. Isn't that what you do? Isn't that great? You love this guy, right? He's just right in his face with this stuff, you know? Maharaj, no, my child, it is not the same. Myself, then do you mean to say that you actually see God and talk to him and know his will? Maharaj, yes. I wait until I know his will and he tells me what I should do. And Swami P.'s still not finished. One more question. Myself, for everything that you do? Maharaj, yes, for everything I do, I have the direct guidance of God. Okay? Now, first of all, if you can accept it, what an amazingly wonderful state that would be to live in. Can you imagine just how secure you would feel in your decisions if you knew that every single one of them was stamped with God's approval? How secure, how at peace, probably blissful you would feel, knowing that everything you did was in accordance and approved of by God. Not much room for worry in our lives at that point, right? But then can you accept it? That's another question. I read this talk, this conversation out in a scripture class in the monastery in Trabuco many years ago. And there was one guy there who, well, probably a lot of people there didn't believe it, but one guy had the temerity to speak up and say, I don't think so, I doubt it. I sympathize, I do. You know, the thing is that Maharaj's life is so perfect in every other respect. Why would he lie about this one thing? Well, you say he's not lying, he's just deluded. He seems to be omniscient. The fact that a man who seems to be omniscient in so many aspects of his life could somehow be deluded in this one is not reasonable. Okay, but I still just can't really accept it. You know, I had a monk tell me once of this experience he had, and this isn't an explanation. I don't think you can explain this. This is just a way to sort of imagine how it's possible. But this monk said that when he was in the monastery, there's all these holy pictures around the monastery, right? Every monastery has these. And so he'd be talking and saying something to somebody, and when he's saying something that isn't quite right, I don't know what he meant, maybe like it was egotistical, I don't think he was lying. It was probably something egotistical or just something, I don't know, off. He said he would feel this pain in his chest. And this pain in his chest, he felt like it was coming from the pictures on the wall, like they were somehow disapproving of him. All the pictures on the wall were frowning at him. He felt this, and it caused this pain in his chest, right? And then he said, on the other converse of that, that when he said something good, something inspirational or wise or unselfish or I don't know what, something good, he felt that the pictures were smiling, and he got a kind of burst of joy in his chest from this, whatever it was he was saying. Well, you can imagine, if you might, that this experience, and I don't know, I haven't asked about this in many years, but this experience might have grown to the point where you're in a kind of continual communication. And hopefully you're cooperative enough to obey this sense that you're getting. But the fact is, I don't really know how it is that every time I gesture up here, I'm aware that God has approved of me moving, right? It seems like too much to process, really, but I think you just have to accept this or not as best you can. So this is another explanation for why Swami Brahmananda was so popular in the pole, is that he seemed to have this incredibly exalted position, even relative to these other incredibly exalted people. He seemed to be head and shoulders above them in some sense. But the fact is that really any of these disciples of Sri Ramakrishna are spiritual enough for us, I think. I think that we may, on paper, like the idea of being as spiritual as Swami Brahmananda, but I think in practice we would find that our spiritual hunger and our spiritual appetites are fulfilled at a much lower level of intake. We may think that we want to climb Mount Everest, but then we find after we've gone up a few thousand feet, we've climbed high enough, right? So I think that this idea that I like him because he's the greatest in spirituality, it may be sincere, but I don't think it's realistic. I don't think the average devotee or the average Swami even has that kind of spiritual hunger that cannot be satisfied until they actually climb to the top of Mount Everest. I think most of us are satisfied at a lower level. So I'm ruling that out as the primary reason for him winning the poll. And I'm going to move on to another explanation that I think probably is the reason that he won the poll. And that is that with all this that he did, all these heights of spirituality that he attained, he seemed to make it look easy. He really did. He seemed to make it look like it just came to him. You know, you read about some of these other Swamis, Swami Vivekananda, you know, so many things happened to him. He's wandering, he's starving, he's chased by monkeys, he's shot at by cowboys. I mean, one thing after another he goes through out there. He's practically going to fall over dead from hunger. He's saved by a cucumber. You know, all these stories we have of Swami Vivekananda, they're amazing stories, right? Doesn't sound easy. It sounds very challenging. In a nutshell, I'd say that's probably why he placed so low in the poll, as his life seems so difficult. And another one is Turiyananda. Turiyananda seems like bulletproof monk, you know? I mean, he wandered around and he seemed like he ate dirt and drank air and he was like bitten to death by mosquitoes and cold and hot and water and everything. I mean, he's just, bring it on, more. You know, he's got this Terminator attitude towards austerity, right? And, you know, that's impressive, right? And Turiyananda actually goes and practices austerities with Maharaj at one point. You know, the incredible Terminator is going to go with Swami Brahmananda out and they're going to wander around and tough it out, right? And what happens? Swami Turiyananda winds up begging food for Maharaj because he realizes Maharaj is so gone from this world. He's sitting down and he's meditating and he's completely forgotten his body. And Turiyananda says, well, I better go get some food or he's not going to live through this. His body is going to die because it needs sustenance, right? And so, I mean, you could almost say that Maharaj was the more austere. He wasn't even going to feed himself. And Turiyananda would bring food back, and if Maharaj happened to be still in samadhi, he wasn't going to eat. And then if he came down from samadhi and said, oh yeah, there's a body here, it might need food, and look, and there's no food there, he'd just go back up into samadhi again, right? That was his austerity. And the same thing happened with another Swami Subodhananda, same thing. They went out wandering, and Swami Subodhananda wound up begging food. He thought, yeah, he's going to die, right? But Maharaj isn't even aware. I mean, do you even call it austerity? If you're not aware that your body is suffering, you think austerity, you know, this is these guys sleeping on a bed of nails, they wear hair shirts, they do all this stuff, they suffer, right? They flog themselves, crazy things people do to become spiritual, right? I mean, his body may be suffering as much or more than any of those people, but if you're not there for it, if you're living in some spiritual reality that is keeping you so satisfied and so fulfilled that you're not aware of the body suffering, do we even call it austerity at that point? That's what I mean by making it look easy. He makes it look easy. And it's interesting that this condition he was in, where he's spending all this time in samadhi and just coming down and saying, is the plate got food in it or not? And then going back up into samadhi, and then somebody else is taking care of the logistics, right? That state is something that Swami Vivekananda actually asked for. He asked Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna, he admitted, Swami Vivekananda admitted, he had Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest non-dual experience in the Kosipur garden house when Sri Ramakrishna was dying of throat cancer, okay? And Sri Ramakrishna says to him, you will get everything, what would you like? And Vivekananda says, well, I'd like to stay in samadhi for a few days at a time and then just come down and maybe eat a little food to keep the body alive and then go back up into samadhi again. And Sri Ramakrishna says, how could you ask for something so petty and small? Now, that in itself is kind of a brain teaser because you think, how could asking to live in the consciousness of God be considered small-minded, right? I mean, you're asking to live in the consciousness of God, and Sri Ramakrishna is telling you this is small-minded. Well, I don't know. And it seems so reasonable, too. I mean, if samadhi is this wonderful state, this wonderful yogic, blissful state, why not live there, right? Why bother about this place? So it seems reasonable and desirable, but Vivekananda gets the no. No, you don't get that. Maharaj seems to have gotten the yes. That's what he's doing. He's basically sitting in meditation, and his consciousness is elevated to some incredible height where he's not even aware of his body, and his brother disciples are feeding him, and he comes down every once in a while, checks the plate, and goes back up again, right? He actually got what Swami Vivekananda wanted, it seems. So the question is, Maharaj made it all look easy. Was it actually really easy? I mean, it may look like it's easy from the outside. Does that mean it really was actually easy? In other words, did Maharaj actually do any work? Right? It doesn't seem like it. And yet, his brother disciples say that he did. They say that he worked. Swami Shivananda here is going to say some nice things about Maharaj. Remember Shivananda, right? Disciple bowed down to him, saw God, right? So Shivananda is now going to say some nice things about Maharaj, and he's going to talk about how much he worked. He says, although Maharaj has spent the major part of his life in practicing austerities, he's also done a great amount of work. Okay, let's hear it. In the early days of the Varanasi Advaita Ashrama, he spent about a month there with another Swami. He would remain immersed in meditation most of the time. Yeah, well, we already heard that, right? Where's the work? In Vrindavan also, Maharaj would remain immersed in meditation. Okay. And then this other Swami, Swami Subodhananda, would go out and beg food for both of them. However, on some days, Maharaj would not get up from meditation even to take his meals. We heard all this already, right? This is the Swami Shivananda is going to say he did a great amount of work, and then he's starting to list all these places where Maharaj lived in samadhi, right? So it seems like maybe he realizes that he hasn't actually described any work, and so he says in the next sentence, renunciation, austerity, meditation, and work have been beautifully harmonized in Maharaj's life. Okay, let's hear it. Now, to me, what I've been talking about so far, he says renunciation, austerity, meditation, and work. To me, it sounds like meditation, 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 and meditation has been beautifully harmonized in his life. Because, as I said, austerity seems to be no austerity. Same thing with renunciation, right? What is renunciation? Renunciation is, as I've said before, why everybody hates religion, right? Renunciation is give it up. All those fun things you're doing, that religion, what does religion say? It says stop doing those fun things because they're bad for you, right? And you think, oh no, I have to give up Netflix, or I have to give up ice cream, or whatever it is that we have to give up, right? Religion says stop doing those things that are fun because they're bad for you. And you say, well, I don't like religion, I'm going to stick with Netflix or whatever, right? But then if you are experiencing a bliss so fulfilling that you completely forget Netflix, you forget about your body, you forget about ice cream, you don't even know that you have a body that needs ice cream, right? If you're living there, do you even call it renunciation? Is that renunciation? There's no self-denial there, right? That's the key to his austerity and his renunciation. There's no self-denial. There's just fulfillment on another level. How much sacrifice is that, right? This, to me, is why I think he has won the poll, really, is that he doesn't seem to discipline himself. He just seems to be rewarded on another level, right? It seems, and Swami Shivananda goes again, he tries again, he says that Maharaj has traveled all over India to spread the master's message. And you think, well, that sort of sounds like work, right? Traveling all over India to spread the message. Well, okay, as far as I know, we don't have a single lecture that he gave anywhere. You know, Swami Vivekananda, you've got them all. Maharaj, I don't know of one lecture I've heard that he gave anywhere. I don't know what he did. It seems like he just went from one place to the next, went into samadhi, and work just happened around him. People came to him and said, "What can I do for you, sir?" That's what seemed to happen, right? An example of this. This may come as a surprise to you, but monks don't always get along. I know that doesn't come as a surprise to the monks, especially the younger monks, but monks fight. You get a bunch of intelligent, capable people together, and you put them in a building, and you tell them to be celibate, sober, and saintly, and you know, live in harmony and love, and you find some friction is going to develop. That's just natural. It happens. And so you don't become a saint in a day or a week or even a few decades, in my case. But anyway, this is happening in Varanasi, India. Monks are fighting, and it's gotten out of hand, and the whole monastery is spoiled, okay? And the senior guys are trying to put things back together in the ordinary way that you would, by talking and figuring out who's on what side, who the ringleaders are, and trying to fix things, and they can't, right? The atmosphere is completely spoiled. And so they write Maharaj, they figured out who the troublemakers are, and they say, okay, we need to expel these guys. And they write Maharaj for permission. He's the president of the order. They write him for permission to expel these people. Maharaj writes back and says, don't do anything. I'm coming to see for myself. So what happens, right? Here's an example of his work, right? He's going to come and fix the situation. When Maharaj arrived, he asked no questions. He lived quietly in the monastery, insisting on only one thing, that all the boys should meditate regularly in his presence. Then he began to instruct them, making no distinction between the good boys and the bad boys. Gradually, the whole atmosphere of the place improved, and when Maharaj left 2 or 3 months later, perfect harmony had been restored and no one had been expelled. So it's work without work. He comes, he sits, he meditates, everything just gets better around him. Now, no wonder he is the favorite. Which one of us hasn't wanted to do that? We come into a situation and we find whatever problem is there. The people aren't getting along, there's pain, there's suffering, whatever it is, and we think, oh Lord, help. We need your help. I need your help. These people need your help. This situation needs your help, right? And then what do? Then we go try and help with our hands and our mouths. We talk and do. That's what we do. What if, instead of that, you just prayed and God fixed everything? I mean, isn't that a wonderful way to go through life in this world? No wonder this guy was chosen as the favorite son. And so that's what I think the secret is. But you may wonder, still, I haven't really asked the question, is he working? Is this work what he's doing? And there's one Swami who's there at one of these invisible healing sessions where Maharaj shows up and meditates and everything just gets better. There's one monk who's there and is going to describe what that's like. He is a brand new monk. He was a chemistry student, very analytical. So he's constantly dissecting everything, all the people he sees and all the situations he comes up against, and he's trying to chop things into little pieces and make sense out of them, right? And so he's sitting in one of these invisible healing sessions that Maharaj seems to be able to orchestrate for the monks. And this is his experience. He says, "I didn't know how to meditate, but my curious mind did not want to be calm. I remember very well that in spite of myself, my mind would feel a peace that I had never experienced before when I meditated with Maharaj and the other monks. With my mind at peace, I would also feel happiness. But instead of enjoying every day that blissful state, my curiosity to know the reason for this rare tranquility and the vanity of not submitting myself to any outside influence made me wonder. I want to see what will happen if I voluntarily raise perturbing thoughts during this period of collective prayer and meditation." So this is, right, we've all tried to meditate probably. We know that when you do, the mind is full of a bunch of junk. You think, what are these thoughts? Where did they come from, right? And sometimes you think, wow, is that even my mind? That's so weird. Where is it coming from, this stuff, you know? And then one day, imagine you walk in, it's just all quiet. Suddenly, you can meditate. Wouldn't you be curious? I sympathize with this. I would also be curious. Suddenly, I walk into the shrine one day, there's a new Swami sitting there, and my mind is completely calm. And it happens for a few days in a row. And I think, this is weird. This isn't my mind. This is somebody else's mind that's here meditating. And I would start to wonder about that. So he's going to try and mess things up intentionally, just to see if it can be done, right? So what happens? He says, as a result, two things happened. The first thing, a creeping sensation was felt in my legs, and it became so strong that after some time I had to abandon my seat and leave the place. The second thing that happened, he says, in spite of all my efforts, my mind would not cooperate. It wouldn't misbehave. I couldn't make it think bad thoughts. He says a force or a strange pressure made it become quiet. Now, the amazing thing about this is we are going to find out that this was being done consciously and deliberately by Maharaj. There's a whole room full of people, whole room full of monks. Maharaj is there meditating. And we are going to find out that he knows exactly who is doing this and what they are doing and why, right? All those things he knows. So he goes on, this monk. He says, to the all-knowing Swami Brahmananda, my antics could not remain hidden. After 3 days of these experiments, I was called to his room. With much sweetness, he told me, look here, my son, if you want to do your experiments with me, then do them when I am alone. I request you not to make them at these early hours, when all are meditating. If they come to know that you are producing a current of opposing thoughts, they may become angry and scold you. Hearing him, I felt very much ashamed. You can imagine. He knows everything. All those things you were doing in there. Troublemaker. He knows it. And he reacts with sympathy and understanding. Naturally, you would feel ashamed. So the question is, how does this work? He knows who you are, he knows what you're doing, and he's stopping your mind from thinking in a certain way, right? And the Swami tries to explain how he says this works. He says, I realized that the Swami knew everything that happened inside me, and that it was the constant flow of his compassion that calmed our minds and filled our hearts with bliss. So that's what he says it was, a constant flow of compassion from the Swami that was so strong, if you can imagine this, it was so strong that it just settled your mind in spite of yourself. It's hard to really imagine something like that. The question remains, is that work? I mean, we've had this experience, I think, to a lesser degree. Someone shows us sympathy, genuine sympathy, without actually judging us, right? We have that, then we feel better. We feel a little relaxed. We feel understood, a little calmness, a little joy maybe even for going through something. We've all had that experience. We've probably been on both sides of that experience. We've given the compassion and we've received it. And we felt the difference in our own awareness. Is it work? Right? The question was, does Maharaj work? Because I said it's austerity without austerity, renunciation without renunciation. Is it work without work? I think it is. Why? Because the working power is love. It is compassion, right? We've all worked. We all know what misery work can be. We all know the drudgery of work. But when that work, could be the same kind of work, is inspired by love, then what happens? We feel no fatigue, we feel no drudgery, we feel no resentment, we feel no hesitation. We're actually eager at times to work for love. When we, say a man falls in love with a woman, or a woman falls in love with a man, and they want to do some little thing for their beloved, or even a big heroic thing for their beloved, they're eager to do it. They can't wait to demonstrate their love through work. It could be difficult, unseemly work, work that they would naturally abhor, but if it's done for the beloved, they enjoy it. They're eager for it. Of course, that doesn't last, right? That's called the honeymoon. Then after that, other things happen. But nevertheless, we understand, right? And it doesn't even have to be a person. I know someone who loves working on cars. He works all week, he's an engineer, and then on the weekend, he just wants to spend all day, both days, playing with his cars. You know, for me, that wouldn't be relaxing. He's ready for another week of engineering after that, you know? So whatever it is, love takes the work out of work, right? And this whole experience that this monk is having, he says, the working motive power and substance is love. Love is what you feel, which is what is calming your mind and filling your heart with joy. Love, right? So yes, I think Maharaj made it look easy because, as I said, austerity without austerity, renunciation without renunciation, work without work, all inspired by love. My feeling is, although I don't remember anybody actually specifically saying it, that this has got to be one of the strongest reasons why he won the poll. And one question that I haven't asked, but is kind of obvious, if Swami Brahmananda is the favorite son of all the monks and devotees, who's the favorite son of Sri Ramakrishna? I never asked that question. Did Sri Ramakrishna have a favorite son? That's another interesting question. And the reason I never asked that question is that to me the answer seems so obvious. You read the Gospel or the Great Master, clearly it's Vivekananda. I mean, just from what goes on the pages and what the authors say, obviously the winner in Sri Ramakrishna's life is Vivekananda. He's the 1,000-petaled lotus. Swami Brahmananda is the 100-petaled lotus. He's comparing his disciples to fish. Vivekananda is the biggest fish. He's comparing them to bodies of water. Vivekananda is a huge body of water. Other people are puddles and things, right? He gives all these analogies where Vivekananda is in first place every time, right? He's going to hand out food to the devotees. He hands something to Vivekananda, dumps the rest on the floor for everybody else to pick up and eat, right? Clearly, the favorite is Vivekananda. So I didn't ask this question, but fascinating. The disciples, when they were asked this question, right, who did Sri Ramakrishna love the most? What did they say? This, to me, is one of the most miraculous things about Sri Ramakrishna's divine play in this world. Every single one of them said that he was most beloved of the Master. Every single one of them said that he himself was the favorite son. Can you imagine that? These people are not stupid. They hear what Sri Ramakrishna says about the biggest fish and the most petals on the lotus and the biggest body of water and the food all over the floor. They're there for that. How can they see and hear all these things and think that they are all most beloved of the Master? How is it possible? You wonder, right? I think the answer has got to be intimacy. That's just my idea. It's got to be intimacy. When someone, because think about what Maharaj did with all those monks. He knows all their minds, reacts to all their perverse inclinations to disobey and whatever else they're doing with sympathy and love. He knows them so well, right? That intimacy, when someone knows you so well, they know every little bit of you, things that you don't know about yourself. And they show you things about yourself that you didn't know existed, wonderful things about yourself, and how to operate these things. They play you like a virtuoso musician. You're an old guitar sitting in a shop. People have been plucking one string, and here comes some incredible guitar player who knows how to do everything with this instrument. And you are that instrument. You are being played by the incredible expert tones and notes that you didn't even know you had. How could you think anything but he loves me the most? You can't conceive of anything higher than what he's shown you. He may be giving Swami Vivekananda the big piece of bread or whatever, but that's just something. He loves me the most. How could he not? We have been so intimate. Our relationship has been so close. I cannot imagine that he loves anybody more than me, no matter what he says, right? And so, why do I end with this? Because this is what we all really want. I mean, it's nice to talk about the favorite son, but the fact is, what we really want to do is be the favorite son, right? That's what we really want to do. We want to be the favorite son. And this incredible fact about Sri Ramakrishna's life is that we can all be the favorite son. As impossible as that sounds, we can all be the favorite son. That intimacy with God is the way to do it. And Sri Ramakrishna's life demonstrates that it actually is possible. Wherever we are in our spiritual journey, we can all be that favorite son. I hope we all attain that. Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Do we have any questions online? We're not doing the living room yet, but if we have any questions for the Swami, you answered everyone's questions. All right, so our next Sunday, as he mentioned, we're going to have the puja for Swami Brahmananda, and that will start around 10 o'clock. And in the afternoon, there will be a Ramnam. Swami Brahmananda was the one who instituted doing Ramnams at the various centers, so we do that in his honor. and that we'll have the usual arati with the relics touching. So again, we're a bit careful about COVID restrictions since things seem to be, the new variant is so contagious, so we're sort of limiting access, but you can get all the information online. And we have our usual weekday classes, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 7:30 and Tuesday at 4:30. And I think that's all the announcements I need to make. All right. You can close with a chant.
May the good Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May he lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. May good betide all. May happiness come to all. May all see the face of truth and be fortified with the armor of love, goodwill, joy, and understanding. Peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us. Peace be unto all. Hari Om.